Howdy, of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Collateral from 2004. Really just wanting to go on and watch another Tom Cruise film. I had seen The Last Samurai, and so I was like, how about we just kind of watch this film? Like, it's an interesting concept, and also, this movie was to eventually lead into, like, a whole certain kind of film. You can't go on and say that Collateral didn't possibly lead to a number of movies like the Dave Bautista film Stuber, or actually a pretty decent film called Ride from 2018, or you eventually also would probably have movies like Night Teeth, which is like the vampire movie where the two girls are to eventually go on and get this Uber car and go on and uh, be vampires and go on and do all these activities for the night and so on and so forth. So, like, there's just a lot of kind of similar kind of movies out there. Like, I would say, like, I would toss out there movies like Spree, but like Spree is just kind of like the guy goes on and just starts killing people, so it's not exactly like Collateral, but still. Um, but normally when I go on and I rattle off like a Hitman movie, because technically this is another one of those, we go on and we have a movie called The Hit List. The Hit List is a Cuba Gooding Jr. movie, which I really enjoy the whole idea of it, anyways. So we have Cuba Gooding Jr. that is to be in a bar with another man, and we have it to where Cuba Gooding Jr. isn't in the best health in this movie, as far as his character is concerned. And so we have this one guy who is mentioning that he's having a bad day, and Cuba's character is to mention that he's a hitman and rattle off a number of people that he wants Cuba to kill, and he'll go on and do that. And so the guy is like, well, hey, like, as a joke, I'm gonna just rattle all these names off, and you're gonna go and find all these people. And Cuba goes on and finds all these people, and it's to kill them all off. And the guy's like, whoa, like, I thought this was all gonna be a joke. Like, I have a napkin given to this man, and I'm gonna be an accessory to murder, and I'm gonna go to jail forever. And man, does this suck. I didn't realize, like, this was all true. So we we go on into this story where we have a kind of phone booth Colin Farrell situation where Vincent could have gone on into any taxi, but he just stumbled upon Jamie Foxx's taxi, who was played by Max. And so within that taxi ride, we come to find out that Vincent is to try to strong arm Max to kind of be his chauffeur throughout the night, to go on and pay him $600 to kind of seal the deal that these guys will be together for the whole night. And all of a sudden, while Max is to need this extra money because he is saying that he wants to get this whole limo side business together, he starts to realize what the entire night is to really entail here, that Vincent is to start killing people, and Max is to eventually be dealing with the aftermath of every single one of these kills, to the point of going on and Max trying to do the right thing at some points, which just lead us to eventually having that one really good moment where Vincent is to finally tell Max, like, well, hey, like you're just kind of going through the motions of your life. You're just going to stay in this taxi like job. You're never going to go on and become this limo driver to the stars. You're just going to stay right exactly where you are, get the money that you're going to have, because like you don't see yourself going anywhere besides that. You're not even going to call that girl who had given you her number. Like, yeah, you're not going to go on and do any of this stuff. And so more and more, this really just has Max become a different person than possibly who he is to be a more confident person, or to eventually be a person who's willing to risk his life for another person. And so that just becomes a really interesting story. And at the end of the day, I think it's just time to say it's right about that time to just go into spoilers about this film. I was also really amazed by like the cast list upon this movie. We have like Jason Statham, who's having a cameo in this film. We have Mark Ruffalo as a guy named Fanning, who's this LAPD character, and like we have Jada Pickett Smith, who ends up becoming at some point Max's possible love interest in this film, and so on and so forth. We kind of have like the who's who kind of plopping throughout this film, and so yeah, I just found it rather enjoyable. Even though really the pacing really murders this film. The pacing does not do this movie any favors. Like right around when we get past like an hour and a little bit of change, I'm like, man, does this movie just like it's really just like slowing down to a really crawl right now, like waiting for eventually this movie to finally pick up again and wrap it up here. I'm like, man, come on, like let's go. Let's go for this movie, because most of this movie is to be uh these kind of like, hey, if the movie wasn't already slowed down, let's slow it down even more, but then let's pick it up again, but let's slow it down. Like, I'm like, how slow can you go on to a film? Like, this needs to be like action packed, like fast pace, whatever. And instead, we're getting this like slow to a crawl kind of, yeah, it just no. Anyways, so really with all the cop stuff, they could have left like a lot of that out. But then also, we could have focused much more on Vincent rather than Max, because really, like, the Vincent parts are the more fascinating parts of the film, and we just kind of get the aftermath of kind of Max watching on as people are to get killed at some points, or Max just kind of waiting after Vincent in parts of this film. So, anyways, let's go on to that double five time territory, because I've already started to spell out this movie anyway, so it's about that time to just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. Hopefully, I'll remember everything, because really, within this movie, there's a lot going on, even though also, like, the pace is what it is. Like, it's still, like, there's a whole lot jumbled technically within this film. So, let's go on. So, we have at the beginning of this movie where Vincent is to get a handoff from Jason Statham's character that really has no legit name within this movie. So Vincent is to get this suitcase swap that is to go and tell him where he needs to go for this whole night. And so Vincent is to end up getting this taxi. And we have it, of course, where Max is to be that guy that Vincent is to be picked up by. But before that happens, we go on, we have Max, who is to be a taxi driver by day, and he is to kind of deal with like this bickering couple that are talking about affairs and all these things, and Max is just like, God, like, I seriously have to deal with these kinds of people. But then Max also is to go on and pick up a lawyer named Annie, and Max and Annie are really having cool vibes between one another. We have it to where Annie is to like the music that Max is to be playing in her taxi. Annie is to talk about that she used to play an instrument, and Max is trying to figure out which instrument it was. and it seems like it's not like a flute or like it's to be like a kind of violin kind of instrument because Annie doesn't have the lung strength. So, and then Max makes a joke about like, well, hey, like it seems the way that you were kind of chewing through that phone, like I felt like you had some lung strength. So we have Max who is to bet Annie that he's going to be able to deliver her the best route because Annie is wanting to go on uh, and tell Max here what is really the best routes. And I'm like, again, if I hadn't said this before, this movie like seems so much like Ride from 2018. Like it's basically like almost like a copy and paste film, but the pacing of that movie is just a little bit better than this one. Hence, a lot of people would just kind of find it interesting. Uh, and eventually they like play around with the Annie kind of character. They play with that a little bit more in that movie than in this film. So after both Max and Annie, Max is to kind of win the best route, and so Annie is to go on and eventually give Max this card after Max is to tell Annie that she needs to go on and get some kind of mental vacation, and Max gives Annie this picture of this island that Max is to always like fantasize about. So Annie goes on and takes the picture and she's like, okay, like I'll go on and like I'll take a mental vacation. And so Annie eventually is to give Max this card, which Max is like, yeah, like great, this worked out. So we then have Vincent who's to be picked up by Max, and Max almost like isn't paying attention to Vincent at first, but then Max is like, "Hey man, like I'll take you, like come on." So Vincent is to get dropped off at his first spot, and so Vincent is wanting Max for the whole night to really say that he's gonna go on and go through uh, this stop and then four other stops. And so Vincent is trying to buy off Max to say, like, well, hey, like, what would you normally get for the night? Like, I'll go on and I'll give you like $600 if you go on and you like will eventually uh like kind of be my driver for the rest of the night. And Max is like, like normally I don't do that kind of thing. And Vincent is like, well, like, come on. So Max is like, okay, sure. So Max was to go on to tell Annie that he wants to put together some limo business. Hopefully, like kind of figuring all the money involved, and he wants to go into business for himself. And so we have it when Max is to talk to Vincent, and so Vincent is to ask like Max like how long he's been doing this, and like he starts to like get the whole history of Max at some point. So Vincent is to go on and ask Max about like what he like dreams about doing, and Max is to not tell Vincent about the whole like him wanting to do this other car business and whatever. He kind of keeps that to himself, and Vincent's like, oh, okay, all right. So anyways, we have Max uh eventually take Vincent to this first drop. And speaking of drop, we kind of have this like Keanu Reeves like Constantine moment where if anybody was to have gone on and seen that supernatural film where we have like Shia LaBeouf who's like the taxi driver that is to drive Keanu Reeves around, and like the beginning of that movie is to have Keanu Reeves doing this like possession kind of thing where he's to put this demon in the mirror and then put this mirror and try to crash it outside this window, and the mirror ends up actually hitting Shia LaBeouf's taxi. It's kind of the same thing within this early stage here. So Max is to go on and be waiting for Vincent, who's to go on to this first drop, and all of a sudden Max is like, do, like, I'll eat my sandwich, I'll just kind of wait for this guy to kind of finish up what he's doing. All of a sudden a man just falls seemingly from the sky, or possibly just from some weird window nearby, and this guy is actually named Ramon. So we have it where Max is to all of a sudden have a guy on top of his taxi, and now his taxi is completely wrecked. So Vincent is to come down, and Max is like, "Oh my god! Like, this guy just kind of fell from off this window," and Vincent is like, "Well, yeah, like he fell on my bullet, and then, or no, like what he says is that like I shot him, but he fell backwards and fell out of this window, and that's what killed him. Not my bullet, really. Just like he's coming up with all kind of goofy ways to say like he didn't exactly kill this person, like the fall killed him. So we have now Max is like, well, hey, we need to call we need to call the police. We need to do something. And Vincent's like, no, like we're just gonna go on and dump this guy in this trunk, and we're just gonna go on through our night because like I bought you for like the rest of it, so we're gonna go on and do all these other spots because I have 5 other times that we're gonna go on and do these trips. And Max is like, wow, like I don't think so. Max is like, well, why don't you just take my taxi? Like go ahead and just steal it, and you can just go on and take this. And Vincent's like, really, I could? And Max is like, well, yeah, just go on and take it. And Vincent is like, no, like you're gonna go on and you're gonna drive me. So we go on through the night, and so we have it to where Max is to get pulled over because, of course, his windshield is now shattered. So we have this cop wanting to go on and inspect this car, and we have this cop that's asking Max, like, well, hey, like, why is it that your windshield's all busted? And so Max is to mention that he was, of course, to run over a deer. And the guy's like, seriously? Like, where is it that you found this deer? And so Max is to mention where he was to go on and see this deer. And he's like, okay, that doesn't make any sense, but okay, sure. So we have it to where the cops are wanting to, like, get this guy to open up his trunk. And Vincent is telling Max, is like, well, hey, like, you don't want me to go on and kill these cops, so kind of figure out how to get rid of them. So all of a sudden, Max lucks out by having these police officers need to go on and do a much more urgent call. Because eventually, what happens is we have Fanning, who's played by Mark Ruffalo, that is to open this door looking for Ramon, the guy that, of course, Vincent wants to have killed. And Fanning is to realize, like, this place looks very disheveled, and, like, there's food on the ground, and so Fanning's like, okay, like, this doesn't seem right. So Fanning is to go on and call for, like, police to be at this location. So, because Fanning is involved with LAPD. So, we now continue to have Vincent with Max as they're just kind of driving along through the rest of their spots. We have this police officer that's telling Max like he needs to go back to his his taxi company right away, and because this car is to be undrivable without like shatter this windshield really is. So we have Max that is to eventually get a call from his boss. And so his boss is now like ridiculing him for like, well, hey, wait a minute, like I had gotten a call from like these policemen like stating that your like vehicle's all like smashed up as if you were in an accident. And so Max's boss is telling him that all the things that were to happen to Max's car is going to be out of his pocket, and Vincent is to grab this kind of radio, and he's to chime in and just be like, hey, like you know that every single bit of this taxi is covered under your umbrella insurance, and like you know that you're just kind of uh you're just kind of shaking down the sky, and that's wrong. So we go on and we have this guy who's asking like, well, hey, who are you? And Vincent is to mention that he's some kind of attorney or he's some kind of lawyer, and that Vincent is to go on and try to uh, eventually kind of be more of a confident person to then force Max to tell him to tell his boss to kind of like, well, hey, like if you don't like it, you can kiss my butt and all this kind of stuff. So we have it to where Max is to go on and Max's boss is to go on and kind of let this slide because Vincent is talking some truth here. So that happens at some point in the movie, probably not right away, but at the end of the day, it still happens within the film. So Vincent and Max are to go on to this penthouse, and so Vincent is to zip tie Max into the taxi. And so Max is trying to alert people that he is to quite possibly be zip tied here and he needs their assistance. And so we have a number of men that are making their way to Max's car, and they're like, well, yeah, man, yeah, I'm gonna go on and I'll help you out. Yeah, this sounds great, but I also want to help you out with you getting rid of your wallet also. This guy ends up pulling a gun on him, and this guy's zip tied to the car, and he's like, hey man, I want your wallet, give me everything that you got. And Max is just like, man, like really? Like seriously, I'm getting like mugged here as like I'm zip tied to this, and like there's a murderer that's with me. So Vincent leaves this penthouse and is to go on and is to chase after these thugs that had taken both Max's wallet and Vince's suitcase. So Vincent is to spot these guys and he is to shoot them down dead. And then Vincent is to tell Max, like, hey, if you alert anybody about what's going on here, I will kill them. Like, you're just going to have a lot of people dead throughout the night if you go on and you try to cause attention to yourself. And so Max is just like, okay, like, I guess there's nothing I can do here. So Vincent is like, well, hey, like, how about we just kind of have a cool down thing? How about we just go on, go to this kind of like this jazz place, and that'll be fun, right? And Max is like, I don't know, like, so Vincent and Max goes to this like jazz place where we have a bunch of guys who are going on and kind of doing some improvised jazz kind of things, because that's normally in a lot of jazz places we would go on and have people just kind of riffing or improvising, and just kind of there's a lot of people that love kind of experimental jazz stuff weirdly. Like we had the one movie, god, what was it, the one film that was to be the astronaut film where Stowaway, there we go. That one of the astronauts really liked this like weird, goofy experimental jazz thing going on, and the other guy was just like, seriously, like this just seems kind of random and odd. And it's like, well, that's the thing about it. It's like, okay, sure. So we go on and have one of the performers, who's a guy named Daniel, that is to go on and meet up with these guys afterwards, and he's starting to just rattle off about Miles Davis, and the guys were kind of asking him, it's like, well, hey, like, could you like perform as well as Miles Davis? And Daniel's going on to like, no, like the guy like carried me like throughout the whole night, like there was no way I could have been as well as him. And so Daniel was to go on say that Miles, after like the performance of that night, Miles was to tell Daniel, it's like, well, hey, like you're good, but not that good. Maybe at some point, like you'll go on and meet with me at some point. You kind of gotta wonder if Daniel is to just have this story that he just kind of presents to everybody. There's like sometimes where you have people where you don't know like if they're really telling you the truth or not, or they just have to have this story in their back pocket. Really, that probably isn't close to true, but they may want to think that this story will get them into like a bigger gig, or possibly get them somewhere if they go on and lie to people about this whole like, yeah, I met Smokey Robinson or Miles Davis or Louis Armstrong, and oh my god, that changed my life forever. So we of course have Vincent, who is to then ask Daniel, it's like, well, hey, like you must like know a lot about Miles Davis. And so I'm going to ask you a question about Miles Davis. Excuse me. And so Vincent is telling Daniel, it's like, well, hey, like if you get this question right, we're going to leave here, but if you get this question wrong, like like uh, like things are gonna be really different, are gonna be a whole different story. So we go on and we have Vincent, who's to mention to Daniel about a certain number of people that Daniel is to go on and be like, oh my god, like I know exactly who this guy is talking about. So we go on, and so Vincent is to ask Daniel about where Miles Davis was to get his education and how he learned to play. And so Daniel was to go on and mention that he was to go on and like have a father who was a dentist, and so Miles went to Juilliard. And so Vincent was to go on and say, it's like, well, nope, that's not really the truth. Pow, shot right in the head. So Vincent was to tell Daniel that it's like, well, like he like flunked out of Juilliard, but then he went on and went another different route, and eventually he got his playing from that guy. So Max was to go on and tell Vincent, it's like, you were never gonna go on and let that guy live. Like either way, I'm sure you're probably wanting to just go on and off all these people regardless. And so Vincent is like, well, like, yeah, I guess it is what it is. So we have certain times within this movie where Max is to go on and see like his first dead body, and just be like mortified by it. And Vincent is to go on and ask him, it's like, well, hey, like I'm sorry, like, so anytime anybody is to go on and die, like a person that you don't even know, like, how bad should you feel for them? Like, did you hear about the number of people that died in Rwanda? And did you go on and like join Greenpeace after that and like try to like figure out a way to save those people? Like no, like because they were nothing to you, kind of like this guy should have been. So, but we also have it where Vincent and Max are to talk about like a bit of their family where Vincent is to say that his mother died when she was young, and he was just left with his father, and so Vincent was to want to go on and kill his father for how much he didn't like him. And so Vincent was to say, it's like, well, yeah, like I killed my dad and I was 12 when it happened. And Max was like, whoa. And then Vincent's like, I'm just kidding. Uh, like he died from like a liver disease or something like that. And so Max is like, oh, okay. So we, speaking of parents, and this is to transition us to another part of this film. So we go on and we have Max, who again is getting a call from his boss. And so his boss is to mention that Max's mother, Ida, had been calling consistently because Max is kind of late for their normal like appointment. And so Vincent is asking Max, is like, well, like you go on at some nights to see your mother in the hospital, and Max is just like, well, yeah, I go on and I see my mother, and Vincent's like, oh, okay, all right. So we have Max that goes on to see his mother in his hospital, and Vincent is to accompany him. And so Vincent is telling Max to buy flowers, and Max is saying, like, no, like, I can't go on and buy my mother flowers. Like, she won't like it. She'll immediately say that, like, the flower is going to wither and die. And so it'll be a waste for me to buy flowers. And Vincent's like, she carry you in a room for 9 months. Like, come on, just buy her flowers. So Max goes on and is to eventually just have Vincent pay for these flowers. So Max is to bring these flowers into Ida. And so we have Ida that goes on and is to kind of just not be all that pleasant to Max, but then be very pleasant to Vincent. And so Ida's going on to Vincent about Max having this limo career, and that he's going to be a guy who's driving like celebrities and stars around. And so Max is going on and eventually just trying to uh, trying to like tell his mother, like, don't tell Vincent all of this. This is like just some random guy. And Vincent is explaining, like, well, yeah, like I went on this ride with Max, and so I'm just kind of here to just be a part of this. And so uh we have it at one point where Max is to take Vincent's briefcase and to go and take the briefcase and run out of this hospital, and Vincent is to run after him. And so Max is to go on, and off this bridge, he ends up chucking this briefcase, and the briefcase ends up getting run over by a bunch of like semis and trucks and cars and whatever. And so Vincent, of course, is to now not have his like preparation list for all the people he's going to kill for that night, for the rest of these people. And so Vincent is to now like tell Max that he needs to go to this certain club to talk to a guy named Felix and get this list from this USB drive that eventually Felix will deliver to Max. So, and I feel like I'm skipping like a million things here, especially when it comes down to the whole like fanning Mark Ruffalo thing. Because we have Mark Ruffalo who eventually is to go to the morgue and is trying to find uh, the Ramon body, and he ends up spotting that there is a number of guys also in this morgue, and so we have the mortician who's telling Fanning it seems that there were certain guys that were all killed by the same person because they had the same bullet grouping, and Fanning's like, well, that could be a situation here. So Fanning eventually is to go on and start to realize that there could quite possibly be a connection with all these bodies piling up that are to eventually be tied to a certain case. So we go on, and by the time that Max is to go on and be making his way to uh, Felix's place, his club, we have these FBI agents that are eventually going on and getting this recording off of Max. Because what ends up happening is Vincent is tell Max to say that Max is Vincent, and for Max to go on and try to get this USB drive from these guys so Vincent can finish up his job, because he's not going to just uh, call his day on account of rain. No, he's just going to go on to finish everything up. So Max goes to this club and is to tell these guys that he's Vincent and he needs to talk with Felix. So Max is to make his way within this club to talk to Felix, and so Felix is to be fairly upset with Max because really Felix is to say it's like, well, hey, like I used to tell my kids this story about not only like Santa Claus and how like they really love Santa Claus, but then there's also a guy named Pedro that would go on and eventually deal with all the naughty kids. And that supposedly, like Santa Claus would have him have a list of all these naughty kids, and then Pedro would go on and deal with all the naughty kids. And so Felix is to mention to uh to Max, it's like, well, hey, like if I'm technically like the Santa Claus in this situation, wouldn't I be upset with Pedro for not really doing his job? And Max is like, you know what, like I get it, like I get the fact that uh you're upset, but like this isn't gonna finish like me doing what I need to do. So like eventually Max was to also ask Vincent like how long he's been doing this, like all kinds of certain kind of like personal questions about like how long Max has been doing this, and like what he gets as far as pay and all this kind of personal stuff, like if he ever gets time off or something. So, but Max goes in there and is to confident his way to get this list, and is to also tell the guy that is to hold a gun uh, to Max, who's actually Paco, to put his gun back, because it's like, hey, like you don't want to kill me here because I want to just finish up my night. I want to finish up my work. So Felix is to go on and give Max this drive, but then afterwards, once Max leaves, Felix is telling Paco to follow Vincent and Max to this next kill and possibly take these guys out. So, come to find out, the next hit is going to happen in a club called Fever. So, we go on and we have it to where, of course, Vincent is to make his way into this Fever place, and we now have Pedroza, who's to be this FBI guy who is kind of tracking where these guys are to go because they want to follow this case, and eventually Pedroza is to eventually be tied with Mark Ruffalo's character, who is Fanning, because they're kind of all working the same case, and so they're going to get intertwined together and start working with everybody. So we go on and have Vincent and Max, who are to make it to this Fever Club, and so Vincent this time around is to not be so stealthy. He's to start going on and killing and injuring every single one of these security guards for this guy that he's to go into and kill. So we go on, and Vincent is really just like beating the crap out of these guys. So Vincent then goes on and is to eventually get to the target that he needs to, kills him off. And so now, not only is Vincent dealing with that, but then he's dealing with a bunch of FBI guys and just a number of like possibilities that that Vincent is going to lose Max at some point, because Fanning ends up going on and getting Max and is trying to pull him out of here, but then all of a sudden Vincent is to shoot Fanning, and then Vincent ends up grabbing Max and like, hey, we gotta get out of here. So we go on and start to have it to where Vincent needs one more hit. Because at this point we have the Ramon guy, we have the penthouse guy, we have this guy that we've just killed, and eventually we had Daniel, so that's 4. So now, like, Vincent is to, of course, tell Max that he needs his 5th spot. Come to find out, the 5th spot is actually Annie herself. And Max is to realize that Vincent was to have scouted this building earlier, and hence why Max was to have been right there when Vincent was to go into this taxi and have them go within the night of the way that they did. So we now have Max that is getting this speech from Vincent, like telling him that he'll like never amount to anything, that he's just gonna go on and be who he is to eventually be. And we also had that one interesting moment where Fanning, before he was to be killed, was trying to put pieces together of another case that seemed fairly similar to this. At one point, they go on and they talk about like this thing that happened in Oakland where some taxi driver was going on and killing a number of people, and eventually like the taxi driver then killed himself. And so they're thinking that there's going to be a possibility that that case and this one could possibly be somehow connected. We also had the one story where Vincent was to tell Max about the one guy who had died on this subway, and eventually this guy kept going around and around for hours on end, and nobody ever realized that this guy was dead. saying that I guess nobody really cared and nobody really noticed that this guy was dead. So we have Max, who, after he's to get ridiculed by Vincent about his life will never amount to anything, Max starts to like race off within this taxi, and like Max is ignoring red lights. He's going on and like speeding through every part of this town, and eventually he is to smash this car into this uh, this kind of construction thing, and it kind of flips over, and so Vincent and Max are to kind of slide their way out of this car, and we have it to both have a cop car that comes here and is trying to help Max, and eventually Vincent is to run off. And so we have Max, who's realizing that Vincent is to go after Annie, and so he can't let that happen. And so Max is to take it upon himself to have this cop's gun and take it from him, and have this cop cuff himself while Max is to run off to find Annie to save her. So, and Vincent was to go on and tell Max, like, hey, you're never going to call this girl. Well, funny enough, he goes on and does call this girl to try to save her life. So, Vincent is to start to make his way through this building. He's starting to pop off some security guards. And so we have it to where Vincent is to realize what floor that Annie is going to at some point be on, within her office having an actual name of her. And I'm like, wow, like she must be a real substantial lawyer of sorts. So we go on and we have Max, who is to go on and call Annie, and weirdly enough, like, he doesn't call her on like her cell phone. He calls her, I guess, on her on her business phone, and so Annie ends up picking this up. So Max is telling Annie that her life is on the line, that she needs to get out of there, that Vincent is 2 floors up, and so Annie's going on and like saying like, what are you talking about? Like, this is a weird time to call me. And so Annie can't believe any of this, and so Max is like, well, yeah, like I figured out like that this guy is to be tied to this Felix case, and he's coming after you to kill you off because you're yet another one of those people that are going to prevent Felix from kind of getting like this whole case being thrown out and whatever. So we have Annie that's going on of like, how do you know about this Felix case? And Max is like, come on, like, get out of where you are. Like, I'm trying to save your life here. So we eventually have it to where Annie is trying to run off through this building as Max is to lose battery in his cell phone. So Vincent is to realize that there seems to be a call coming from a certain floor, that someone is to answer it, and so Vincent is to pinpoint exactly where this girl is to possibly be. So Annie's scrambling through this building and to try to get the heck out of there. And so eventually Annie is to meet up with Max, which eventually leads Max and Annie to try to get on this subway station to try to get away from Vincent. But Vincent ends up going into the same like subway as both Max and Annie are, so it's really just a matter of time. So Max eventually again is to still have that gun from the cop. So we have Vincent that is to slowly but surely make his way through this subway or this light rail or whatever it ends up really being called. So Vincent is to make his way to Max and Annie, and whenever it seems that there's a stop, Vincent gets out to think if they're going to eventually get out of this subway or not. So Vincent goes back into the subway, just like, okay, all right, like so Vincent just gets closer and closer to the point of Max having this gun ready, and Vincent has to remind Max, it's like, hey, like, I kill people for a living. So Max is to go on and just fire all these bullets into this door, and miraculously, one of the bullets ended up hitting Vincent. And so we finally just have it to where Vincent is to realize that he's going to die here. And so Vincent just kind of gives up on going after his last kill. And so Vincent is to tell Max, like, how long do you think before anybody's going to find my body? Like, will, like, this be any different than the other story that I told you? And so Vincent then dies, and Max and Annie are to eventually just kind of get out of this subway to then try to seek out help. And eventually, this is just kind of how this movie is to just finish up with these two eventually finding the help from people and telling their story and so on and so forth. And movie finishes up with a quasi happy ending. So with that said, I think when a happy end my way out of here, hopefully I went on and kind of in some way or another went on and said most of this film. There probably were several things that I probably had forgotten about, but there's a lot to talk about within this film. And really, at some points, I'd like to just kind of speed up and call this a day so I can avoid having to kind of clip things together or whatever. So, let me know how you felt about this film. Let me know if there's something that I possibly had forgotten, because I'm sure I probably did. Other than that, yeah, like, just pacing of this movie eventually going on uh, and kind of just getting through, like, oh man, like the later and later parts of the film, I was just kind of like, man, there's just like this movie's so slow. And so I was like having a problem like thinking of all like the stuff that happened toward the end of the film, because I was like, man, I'm just like, I'm really like, I really need to kind of glue my patience on towards the end of this film, just because of how just like trickle down slowly it is. But anyways, that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.